Hello, and thanks for watching this third video discussing how I approach LSAT games. The first two videos, I explained how to do two of the games from the LSAT 2007 June LSAT. Again, that can be downloaded directly from the LSAT website, and again, I've provided the link for you on my website. And what this video is going to do is kind of review what I did in the first two videos, and so I can more properly introduce you to my four-step method for games. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that we did. The first thing I want to talk about is right up the top here, where it says games. If you're writing, you're doing it right. If you're staring, you're doing it wrong. Really important on these games to work, okay? A lot of the times you might not see exactly where they're trying to get you, but if you get where they're trying to go, but if you just sit there creating some setups, that will get you used to the game and you'll start seeing some patterns. Don't just sit there and stare. And you can tell yourself, all right, I'm writing, I'm creating some setups, I'm working, therefore I'm doing it right. Okay? All right, so let's talk about this general four-step method for games. So the first thing you want to do, and this is what I did before, is you want to write down the entities. You want to write down the number, like 5, the type, like digits, and then the characters, like 0 through 4. Sometimes you want to consider building entities directly into the sketch. And that just depends on you. Um, Step two is create a sketch based on the type of game, and you can almost always use slots or some kind of chart. And what I'd actually like to do is from step two is go down to here, please, where it says game step two, types and sketches. So what I showed you was a sequencing game. That was in the first game, and I would call it somewhat of a standard game. And that's where entities are placed in order. By the way, when you're given days of the week or months or years, sometimes you want to place these on top of a chart. I also showed you number 3, a distribution game, right, where we distributed materials among centers, and this distribution game, the sketch is a chart, and where it's a larger set of entities is placed among a smaller set. And when you're given two sets of entities like centers and materials, place the smaller set on top of the chart, and there we had our centers on top of the chart. The other types of game, number 2, a yes-no game. That's where only two choices are in placing a set of entities, like maybe something's on sale or not on sale, or something is in Oakland or Berkeley, go Berkeley, or maybe something is on or off. Going to number 4, you have a matching game. That's where entities are matched to one another. The sketch there is also a chart. And the game might describe a specific sketch. Number 5, selection of a specific number. The sketch there is going to be labeled slots, and that's where a specific number of entities is to be selected from a group of multiple entities. That can get a little bit tricky. And then finally, a combination game, and that's where the game types are combined. All right, so that's step 2, the types and sketches, and obviously during the tutoring, I go through all types of sketches. You do want to know how to do all 6 of these. All right, going back up here, right? Game's four-step method. Step 3 is to write down the rules. All right, and then which I'm going to talk about in a minute, writing down the rules. That's also making deductions as well. And then finally, step 4 is answer the questions appropriately. And I'm going to discuss that in a moment as well. So for now, I'd like to discuss step 3, which is writing down the rules. So let's talk about that. So here, game step 3, writing down the rules. Do the following whenever possible. So first of all, you do want to try to build rules into the sketch. We didn't really do an example of that. Maybe in the code game we did. Sometimes you want to rephrase as blocks. We did not have an example of that. But notice all these kind of sub things here. These are all deductions that can be made based on rephrasing rules as blocks, but we had no examples of that, by the way, in the prior 2 games. Number 3, rephrase the rules into if-then form. That's what we did do for the second game, and we talked about recalling the contrapositive. Again, this contrapositive stuff, big deal. It's formal logic, again, outside the scope of these particular videos. Notice the second one, build special if-then rules into the sketch. That is unique to my training. I have developed these killer 2 special if-then rules that completely change the nature of the games. but you'll have to kind of wait on that for videos if I ever put together one, or see it in my training, because it's some cool stuff. All right. Number 4, rephrase rules into specific numbers. That's what we did before. In the first game. Always do that. So first of all, you got to consider 0 as a possibility. Sometimes people forget 0 is actually a number, and it's really important to complete the number possibilities. The way you do that is if you're ever given any math, begin by assigning 0 to the lower numbered entity and work from there. And then if you're given if then, recall the contrapositive. These two, not really a great example of that I had. What's more important is breaking down numbers into specifics, and we did that with the first rule. Number 5, you can also rephrase rules as groups or split groups, and I kind of did that in the second game where we said glass and plastic cannot go together. It says use slashes to place split groups, and I don't really have a great example of that. Before I move on, these 5 that I've just bracketed off, these are almost 95% of the rules can be rephrased in one of these 5 formats. And then once you do that, very often you can make deductions as indicated. Again, the only deductions that we really had was based on the first game where I broke down numbers. 6, 7, and 8 are not that big of a deal. Number 6, note any floating entities. That's not a big deal. It's those entities not addressed in the rule. This is also not a big deal, but it says use slashes to place interchangeable floaters. I talk about that during the tutoring, my training. Number 7, translate exactly into only. The importance of that I talk about during my training. And then finally, number 8, compare rules to make any additional deductions. So sometimes after you've done all these 1 through 5, essentially all these here, right? Sometimes you just have to back up a little bit and go back to number 8 and ask yourself, is there anything else that I can figure out to make additional deductions? But again, the first 5 that I've written down here, those will take care of about 95% of your deductions and 95% of your rules. A good, streamlined, uniform way to approach the rules in the games. So that's step 3, writing down the rules and, of course, making deductions. Let's go into step 4, please, which is dun, dun, dun. Step 4, answer the questions appropriately. So too many students, in my opinion, believe that once all they really need to do is get the sketch and get the rules, and then they can answer the questions, but the LSAT knows that you think that way, so sometimes they make the questions very difficult. So let me talk about a few of these. This number 1 here, define the question type by identifying the nature of the wrong answers. That takes a while to explain, so I'm not going to go into that for this particular video. I do want to talk about these notes here instead. I did talk about could be a complete and accurate list versus is a complete and accurate list. So when it says could, remember you're looking for one specific example that works. When they're talking about is, you're looking for all possibilities that work, and that's important to note the difference between the two. All right, let's go move right along, please, to this number 2. Answer the questions in the following order. Okay. I did not make up this idea. There is one prep company that does this. I don't think I'll name them, but I totally stole it from them. So thank you very much for that. You do want to answer the questions in this order. Line up first, then the if questions, then the non-if questions, and then rule change. Sometimes it will change the rules on you, and you want to save these for last because they can be a real pain. We talked about you want to answer these if questions so to help you answer the non-if questions, and you saw that in the example of my second video. On the other hand, non-if questions should actually be answered in order if you're given any good deductions. So like, for example, in the numbers game that I did, we had all kinds of good deductions, so there was no reason to answer the if question first. When you have good deductions, just answer the questions in order, but you won't always have good deductions. All right, so that's number 2. Number 3, let's talk about the various questions. And I notice this is not the whole page. I will be scrolling down in just a minute. But number 3 here, lineup questions. This gives you the approach to lineup questions. That is when the answers provide a complete lineup of the game. This is a very traditional approach. The first thing you do is select a single rule. Recall that rules are built into the sketch and in shorthand. Number two, apply that rule to each answer, eliminating those answers that violate the rule, and then repeat the process until only one answer remains. That's a fairly straightforward process. What I just described, all the test preparation companies do what I just described, and all students should certainly do it in this way. However, by the way, partial lineup questions, lineup except, those are other types of lineup questions I don't think I'm really going to discuss now. But by the way, this last one, you can use the correct answer as prior work when answering other questions. So once you get to the correct answer to a lineup question, you know that works, and you can use that lineup itself to help you answer other questions. All right, so those are lineup questions. I think I'm going to actually extend this page. Let's see. Gee, that takes a while. Let's do it like this. There we go. Okay, let's see. I think I'll have to do that. Okay, so number 4, these if questions. So this is what I actually developed on my own. And this is really important. These 3 steps, make sure. The first thing, number 1, build the if into the sketch. If the if is ambiguous, and we discussed that in the second game, you need to place entities anywhere allowed by the rules. This second one is really a big deal, folks. Really a big deal. Use the rules to build in any additional entities into the sketch. These are the ways in which you do that, okay? The best way is to look for entities common to the rules and those built into the sketch. You do want to try to build in blocks or numbers. Eliminating ends, I didn't talk about that. Don't worry about that. And you also want to recall the contrapositive. So obviously some of the things here are too abstract because we have not discussed them in prior videos. But these last 2 here, you definitely want to complete the sketch when it's easy to do so. Always work. Always work. And then sometimes consider creating 2 or 3 options at once. We like working. So that's step 2 in the if questions. Step 3, evaluate the answers appropriately. See part 7. So actually, why don't we skip down to part 7, talk about evaluating the answers appropriately. So, like as I discuss, I provide students with everything they need to know about how to approach these games, okay? And both the LSAT and the GMAT as well, okay? You will never be stuck. With my tutoring, if you learn what I have in my training manuals, you will always know exactly what to do at all times, including how to evaluate the answer choices appropriately. So step 1, compare each answer to the information in your sketch. If the correctness of an answer is not readily apparent, just move on. Okay, for all you know, answer choice E will be our answer. And if you don't know about A, B, C, or D, don't fret. Just say, I don't know, and then you'll get to E, and maybe you'll see, oh, it's answer choice E. I'm glad I didn't waste time with answer choice A through D. Consistent with that, only eliminate those answers that are clearly wrong. Well, you might be asking, well, what if I have remaining answers? Well, that goes to number 2 here. Build remaining answers into the sketch. Look, if I have only 2 or 3 answers remaining, all I need to do is just build them into the sketch and see if they work. Really important, number 3, you got to be willing to make a quick guess and move on. Really important, they don't have a guessing penalty. It's more important to try to finish the entire section than take too long on any one question. So that's number 7 here, evaluating these answers appropriately. But let's go back to number 5 here, the non-if questions. So with non-if questions, the first thing you always want to do is try to use your rules and deductions to evaluate the answers. But number 2, use prior work. Use prior work. We discussed that. That's why you want to do these if questions first, so you have a lot of work. That's also why if you're writing, you're doing it right. So just creating setups so you can use those setups to help you answer these non-if questions. The last questions you want to answer are the rule change questions, and when they do change the rules, they'll almost always be the last question in the game regardless. And the general rule for that is you want to try to apply the rule change only if you feel you have the time. Sometimes rule change questions are easy, sometimes they're very difficult, very time consuming, and one of the things that the LSAT is testing is, do you know when things are going to get too hard for you and you're supposed to move on? And that'll be depending on kind of how you feel about that particular rule change. Okay, so this is my method for approaching the games. Not anything particularly clever, I must say. I think my logical reasoning is 10 times more clever. But what this provides is a streamlined methodology. Notice the entire time during the game, you will always have something specific to do with my training. Okay. I can't promise you that just after watching these three videos, you're going to be an expert at the games, obviously. But this hopefully will provide an adequate preview for you for how I approach the LSAT. Thanks for watching. I hope this was a help to you, and good luck on the test.